Get ready to go. All right. Sorry for the noise, y'all, but today I am joined with Brandon Quittem. He self-describes his superpower as the ability to translate complex systems into simpler ones. He has worked on enterprise software at Oracle, and he now enjoys traveling, surfing, and food with his wife, who you just married very recently, right?
That's right, this year.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks, man.
He is an entrepreneur, speaker, writer, and he advises companies like Swan Bitcoin and other Bitcoin companies in content marketing and email marketing. But today we are really going to try to hash out his notoriously famous Bitcoin Medium articles titled Bitcoin as the Mycelium of Money. So my viewers are fungal people. They're into fungi. So I'm really excited to combine my two favorite interests in this podcast and talk about Bitcoin as well as fungi and how they are related. So Brandon, thanks again for joining me. And just before we get started, you're in Minneapolis, so I have to ask about the unrest that was happening the past couple of days. I just heard some people were arrested after a curfew, but it's not really a whole lot. I honestly didn't read too much into it, but are you safe? Did it affect you, or how's that going?
Yeah. So thanks. First of all, I appreciate you having me on here. I agree. The merging of these two things, mycology and Bitcoin, is probably the coolest synergy that I can think of because they are, like you, two of my great passions. And so combining them feels a little bit like a dream come true. And so, yeah, first of all, just happy to be here. Second, how am I doing with the recent unrest? I live in Minneapolis, so the recent stuff and, a couple months back with George Floyd, that was all within a couple miles of my home. However, my neighborhood was relatively insulated, so I never really felt particularly unsafe in my house. But yeah, you drive around town, everything's different. Shops are boarded up. The tone has changed, and I'm not really sure what the future is going to be of Minneapolis. Like, I know, defund the police is a popular thing actually in the city. I couldn't say with what percentage, but the conversation's being had. And yeah, I don't have strong opinions one way or the other on how this is going to go or what I think personally. I find it to be quite chaotic. I find it to be hard to figure out what information is real. And so, yeah, I'm trying to just keep an open mind and observe, but not let it stress me out day to day or affect my day to day life. That's what I would say.
I hear you, man. People might know that I just moved here from Georgia to Portland, Oregon, but I'm actually not in Portland proper. I'm like 20 or 30 minutes to the east in a town called Gresham. So yeah, while they're going ham every night over in downtown, I don't really hear it or see it. I do have some opinions on it, but I really won't go over that today. I could do a whole podcast on this whole thing. So, but yeah, glad you're safe. Glad to know that. I just had to ask because it literally just happened within the past couple of days. But I got a list of questions for you if you're ready.
Let's do it.
All right, man. So before we talk about Bitcoin, how did you first get into mushrooming?
Yeah, so let's see. I always liked mushrooms as a food growing up. Like, hey, you put them on your steak, but didn't really think anything of them. And then in 2010 is when I graduated from university here in Minnesota. And a couple of friends and I decided to try some psilocybin mushrooms. And we had a really nice day in the park and playing frisbee and climbing trees and just, kind of appreciating this headspace that I knew very little about going into it. And soon after that, I started foraging mushrooms, looking for morels for food's sake. And, I haven't really thought about it at the time, but I think there was probably some connection. I think the first few psilocybin experiences definitely opened my mind to another world. And I would say that I grew up in a religious family, a Christian family, going to church, doing all that. But as I got older, I didn't really buy what was being sold. And so I sort of went militant atheist for, from let's say 18 to 22, 23, somewhere around there. And it wasn't until the first few psychedelic experiences when I started to realize, like, okay, maybe we don't know everything, and maybe there is more out there, and maybe humans aren't even capable of knowing answers to the great mysteries. And so I sort of softened my position there, and it was a little bit more open-minded to the great mysteries and the big questions. And so, yeah, it went from tripping, mushrooms, LSD, and MDMA in a relative short period of time. Probably about a year later, I started foraging. And I fell in love with foraging because I'm always outside. I like camping, grew up doing that. Now all of a sudden you have this mission out there. You're kind of treasure hunting in the woods, and you got to learn the trees and the seasons. And you really, really hone in on the land, and you start to notice these little things. And yeah, it sort of opens up a whole new world that's literally right beneath our feet, where pretty much everyone lives. This is an opportunity. And I also really like cooking and food, especially strange ingredients, wild food, hunting, fishing, foraging, that type of stuff. And so, yeah, it fit really nicely into my life, and it turned into I can identify a handful of species to now I'm in the woods probably twice a week. My refrigerator is probably 60% mushrooms, and I can identify hundreds of species, and I spend a lot of time foraging. I also love introducing new people to foraging. And what I found is that probably between 80 and 90% of people who I take out for the first time, they absolutely love it. And I don't know if it's because it is fun, it's sort of like a Easter egg hunt or something, or if it speaks to something deeper where humans have this built into our DNA is hunting and foraging, living off the land. And I think modern society sort of turned towards a different type of future, a man-made future. We sort of built ourselves an ecosystem that's outside of the ecosystem in which we came from, a concrete jungle city, for example. And I think when people do go back to nature, it calms them down. It lights up all these areas in the body and the brain. It says, oh, this is what a human monkey suit is supposed to do. And it feels right. And most people can't put their finger on it, but it just feels right. Just like going camping, day 3, first 2 days, you're kind of stressed. You're worried about the time. You're kind of rigid. You wake up on the 3rd day and all of a sudden you're like, whew, I can relax. I'm waking up, I'm going down with the sun, I'm in a rhythm, I'm calm, my mind has stopped chattering, and I'm just contented. Not blissfully happy, but contented. And so, yeah, that all kind of circles together and feeds my day to day. I work in technology, but as soon as I'm done, I go out in the woods.
No, that's awesome, and I love that about how possibly being out there just speaks to the human anatomy, the human soul. I love that so much, actually, because when because that could be a life-changing experience in and of itself. But I started noticing the trees when I started smoking weed for the first time. Like I would be walking around my neighborhood after smoking, and it's a new experience. And it felt like the first time I noticed trees. I was like, these guys are here. They're our buddies. They produce oxygen for us. I'm gonna but yeah, so I mean that's that's that. And when it comes to foraging, like it's definitely a spiritual experience. I'm struggling to find a better word for it, but I think it is speaking to something so innate inside the human anatomy. So I love that you brought that up. As far as camping, I still got to get my I don't even have camping gear, but the way you're making it sounds like a damn delight. So I probably have to go try that out.
Non-negotiable, man. If you can forage and fish and cook over the fire, I mean, there's nothing better in my mind. Grab a couple buddies and get out there.
Yeah, I actually there's someone on Twitter who said he's been hanging out at Mount St. Helens he said he spent months out there. I'm like, months? I can't even, like, I can forage and identify mushrooms, but it doesn't really go. I'm not even good with plant identification. So I need some training. Anyways, so yeah, awesome. That's how you got into mushrooms. And again, the psilocybin, I feel like a lot of us learned the appreciation for mushrooms and fungi through the psychedelic experience, through taking mushrooms for the first time. I'm definitely one of them. It's just interesting how that happens.
I agree. I would say I thought I appreciated nature. I thought I observed the finer details. I thought I was integrated, etc. And then I realized through, the the first couple of years of psychedelics that I wasn't even close. I was still in, a techno future state outside of the ecosystem, truly. And all of a sudden you start to look at it when you mentioned cannabis and noticing the trees for the first time. I resonate with that. It's true. It's like, wow, trees are incredible. They really are. And we just walk by them every day and we don't pay attention to them. And they sit there standing tall for 100 years or 1,000 years, just doing their thing. And we just scoot on by, never mind.
Yeah. What I wanted to say on, going out, and you said 80% of people or something just love it. They love it. What I've noticed when I was waking up to my natural environment is I would take it back home. I would take it back to suburbia, and I'd just be walking along the sidewalk and just notice maybe a bump in the sidewalk where a tree root is trying to come through. And it's just like, well, was this really the best engineering idea to try to place the concrete right here? And like I started seeing how we layer this concrete over, and we try to control nature so we can have our little human bubble. But this is where permaculture can come into the picture. It's like we need to learn how to work with instead of trying to dominate nature. That's what I learned. That's what your story reminded me of.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point because there's this controversy over, are humans good for the planet? Are we just this cancerous species that can't seem to fit in with our ecosystem? And if you fly over LA, for example, it looks like humans are a cancer. We just sprawl. We never stop growing. We don't give back, etc. But I think humans have the capacity to be the garden species that makes this planet amazing, right? Because nature actually does like it when we interact. When we build trails, we support the ecosystem. Pruning plants makes the plants happy just for the microcosm. And so I firmly believe that humans can make the ecosystem on our planet much, much, much better. It seems like at a population scale, we're not really doing that. We're just extracting and building industry, et cetera. And those are important things. Through capitalism, through markets, through industry, we have raised the poverty line. The rising tide lifts all boats idea. That is true. There's never been a better time to be alive as a human, just to be an average human, because so many people have the basic necessities taken care of now. And that's from markets, that's from capitalism. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to reconcile the need for markets, which I believe is fundamentally absolutely true. And at the same time, we can't just crash our ship, our spaceship Earth, and just burn it to the ground. And so where's the balance between those two things? And I have no clue what the answer is. At this point, it feels like something radical has to shift in order for humans to steer the ship in another direction. Otherwise, we better colonize Mars, in the next 50 years to ensure our species doesn't go extinct, which I think has a legitimate chance. And I don't want that to happen. So the Earth will be fine. Homo sapiens will be gone.
The Earth will be fine. That is very true. Okay, so unfortunately, I feel like I'm racing against my battery life because I'm at a coffee shop. There's no outlets. So let's talk about Bitcoin, Brandon. What did I write for you? Okay, so before we kind of segue into that, you describe in your article and in your talks, you described the archetype of mycelium as a network archetype. Can you explain in what other areas of life can we see this network archetype? Or you can use the fungal, example.
Yeah, definitely. And so what I'm trying to get at here is the archetype, and let's use mycelium because most people on the podcast are familiar. So the network archetype of mycelium is the single cell walled branching, let's just call it an underground root structure. And there's no central point of control. It acts as if each individual molecule, each individual tip of hyphae is acting autonomously and in its best interest. And yet it shares information through this network. And so it sort of creates a decentralized intelligence network or a decentralized brain. And so that archetype of decentralized intelligence, decision-making pushed to the edge, no central point of control, etc. That's not unique to fungi, although I think the earliest fossil record now is 1.3 billion years old of finding fungal records. And so that more or less says the among the first complex life on Earth was these fungal networks. So very, very, very old structure. And what's interesting is it's not just fungi. If you look at dark energy, dark matter in the universe, it also forms the same network archetype. If you look at neurons in our brain, same thing. There are areas that have specialized roles, but there's no centralized point. It's just a network trading electrical signals that we consider to be data that we somehow interpret with our mind. And if you zoom, yeah, I guess that's probably a good example. And now if you look at the computer internet, that's just a network, a decentralized network of individual nodes that all act in their best interest, but the aggregate forms this network. And finally, ending up on Bitcoin, it's the same thing. There's both a hardware network in Bitcoin, meaning I run a node on my computer, and so does tens of thousands of other people, and those nodes all communicate. And that's how you can propagate transactions. That's how you store the record or the ledger of who owns what at what certain point of time. But then there's also this human layer in Bitcoin. So each individual who participates in Bitcoin is also a node in the network. And as a node myself, I can voice my opinion and do what I think is best for my individual situation. And now you multiply by millions of different Bitcoiners all doing their own thing. And yet together that aggregate somehow appears to be intelligent, separate from its individual parts. Like the sum of its whole is something new and different. And it appears to be alive. And famously, Ralph Merkle, who is a cryptographer, he noticed that Bitcoin appears to be alive. It eats, sleeps, and breathes on the internet through its issuance schedule or through the mining process, which I don't think we want to go too deep into. It actually pays people to do the security and do the accounting for the network. And over time, the network runs into some sort of issue. Maybe someone tries to hack the network, and then the software developers involved notice the attack, create new software that defends against the attack, and the system learns, the system evolves, and it gets better over time. It sees opportunities.
In the same way that the mycelial network will identify certain bacterioids and alert the rest of the network on how to defend against that.
Exactly. And over time, these mycelial mats, they actually develop a chemical library of enzymes to defend themselves. And so that is learning, that is consciousness. And it might not be the same as our human, narrowly defined thinking, rational mind type consciousness, but it's consciousness. It's definitely intelligence. And so I think we need to be a little more humble as a species and realize that monkeys don't have it all figured out. And in fact, nature's designs are typically more elegant, more efficient, and they also last a very long time throughout evolutionary history. And so when we see these archetypes or these evolutionary strategies working, we should say, wow, it's worked for that long. There must be something to it. And that's how I feel about mycelium, where the fact that that is a network archetype that we see in tiny scales and large scales throughout geological evolutionary history, it works, right? And now when you see the computer internet and Bitcoin's network, they're the same archetype. And so to me, that lends credibility to those systems as systems that are going to be anti-fragile, meaning that they're going to gain from disorder, gain from chaos in their environment because they learn, they evolve, they get better, which means those systems are not going anywhere. And we should respect those systems and attempt to learn them because they mimic mycelium, which I'm sure people on this call can all agree we love and we find to be endlessly fascinating, and we barely understand it. We're still monkeys at a stick trying to poke at these things.
Yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right about that. 100%. Cannot agree more. Okay, we kind of mentioned decentralization, but I'll skip over that because you kind of exemplified the importance of decentralization in these networks. But can you talk about the Bitcoin hype cycle and how that is related to fungal reproduction?
Yeah, definitely. So throughout Bitcoin's history, now it's about 11 years old, there has been four explosive price growths. Let's say it goes up 50x in price and then it crashes down. That's happened about 4 times now. And most people only remember the 2017 period because Bitcoin went from like $1,000 to $20,000 in the year of 2017, and the whole world starts to pay attention to it, etc. But just to lay the foundation, that was the 4th time that it's happened. And so what we're observing in the Bitcoin network is it grows in those every 4 years hype and crash type cycle. And so now let's compare this to how a fungus would reproduce. So as we know, most of a fungus's life is in its mycelial form, whether underground or in wood or in some other medium. And then when the conditions are absolutely perfect, it concentrates its hyphae right underneath the surface and puts a lot of energy there. And then all of a sudden it bursts out of the ground, out of the tree, or even bursting through asphalt. And out of nowhere, this mushroom explodes into life. And just as soon as it reaches maturity, it releases its spores to reproduce and then very quickly decays and disappears back in the ground. Now let's parallel that with the hype cycle of Bitcoin. For about 2 to 3 years at a time, it's pretty quiet. Nobody's talking about it. The price is boring. And then all of a sudden the conditions are right and the price starts going up. And now attention's focused on Bitcoin, which increases the price even further. And the price explodes and crescendos, just like that mushroom. And then it reproduces because it draws in all these new people. The spores flutter around, they land on the ground. Most of the spores die, but a few survive. And those surviving spores are like new people brought into the Bitcoin ecosystem who were initially attracted from the hype. And those new Bitcoiners connect and they meet each other. Most of them leave when the price goes down, but some of them stay. And the ones that stay form new mycelial colonies underground and building the underground network of Bitcoiners. And so, yeah, there's kind of a nice parallel between the mushroom popping out of the ground, reproducing, and the hype cycles or price manias, or however you want to call it in Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely personally attest to that being valid as a method of Bitcoin to bring in new users, because that was me in 2017 being like, whoa, I haven't heard about this thing in like 8 years or so, and the next time I hear about it, it is just this price at 20,000 per coin, and it's like, wait, why? What's backing it? Why is it valuable? And I just start asking all these questions, and I just start learning about it, reading about it. I was that spore that dropped and was able to colonize, and now I'm a full Bitcoiner. And yeah, so I love that. I love learning about your parallels that you described there, because it is absolutely true, and it's the parallels between Bitcoin and mycelium are just, it's astounding. It really is. It really is. So I do have a few more questions. Okay, so for you, Brandon, I wanted to ask how you got into Bitcoin, and if it was simply because you saw the number going up.
Yeah, good question. So I initially bumped into Bitcoin in like 2011 or 2012 as it relates to the Silk Road, which, if you're not familiar, that was like an online marketplace where you could buy anything, mostly illegal drugs. And at the time, Bitcoin was what was used to acquire things on the Silk Road. And I just heard about this through a friend. I was like, holy shit, you can use magic internet money to buy drugs on the internet. That's wild. And didn't really think about Bitcoin, just thought, wow, that's interesting that exists. Fast forward a few years later, I was on a tour through Asia in 2014 and bumped into it again at a meetup in Bali, and it started to make sense then. However, I wasn't quite, I was just hippie backpacker traveling the world. I was not in the mood to learn about economics or what the profound implications of Bitcoin. I wasn't ready to accept that message, although it started to make sense. And then again in 2017, bumped into it for the 3rd time, and it finally stuck that time. And it was because the price was going up. Humans are innately looking to increase their lot in life. You could call that greed, or you could just say being, you want to increase your lot in life, and this thing's going up, so why not get some? And I tell that story in 3 interactions because it does take most people at least 3 times of bumping into Bitcoin before they're finally like, okay, there's something here. I should look into this more. And that's what I did in 2017. As soon as I realized that okay, this is a big deal, I pretty much did nothing for 6 months besides read and study, and my mind was just blown every single day. And when I got out of that deep hole, I mean, I was doing nothing. My wife was like, "You're not seeing your friends. You know, all you do is read. What are you doing?" When I came out of that, I was like, "Okay, I'm shifting my career. I'm spending my time here. I love this stuff." And you know, that was I made that decision in like early 2018 or so, and that was before I had noticed the parallels with mycelium in Bitcoin, which was maybe about 6 months later, sometime in 2018. And once that started to come into my mind, I was even more confident, and also started writing about those parallels, and have since written about 10,000 words or so in an article series about that topic. And I have probably at least that, or maybe more, if I choose to continue down that topic. And so for all the mycologists or amateur mycophiles like myself out there, I really do encourage you to take a look at this series. And you know, you're going to learn a lot about Bitcoin in a short period of time because you have that mycological knowledge. And I've gotten, you know, hundreds of messages now from more of the biology or mycology side of things, where they're saying, I never really understood Bitcoin, and this analogy, this lens really helped. And so, yeah, that's how I got into Bitcoin.
Awesome, man. Perfect. And unfortunately, I had a few more questions, but we're running out of battery here. So how can people reach you? We got to do this again, honestly, because I got so much more to ask you. But yeah, how can people reach you, and yeah, your preferred method of contact or whatever?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, thanks for having me, John. I'm happy to do this anytime. I saw you had Christopher Gunluck on recently, who's a Minneapolis native friend of mine. And I've seen you at Alan Burgo, another local guy here. And so, yeah, good people coming out of Minnesota on your podcast.
Yeah, I don't know how they're all coming out of that same area. It just happened that way. No idea.
And so how can you reach me? I think Twitter is the easiest. My handle is bquittem, BQUITTEM. You can also find me on my website, brandonquittem.com. I have content on Medium, but I'll be publishing all my new content on my personal website. And if you're curious about these things, my DMs are open. Come say hello. I'm very, very interested in merging both the mycological community and the psychedelic community into the Bitcoin community. I think that it's starting to happen. I was on the Psychedelic Salon podcast with Lorenzo a month or two ago. And
no way. Awesome.
Sort of introducing the psychedelic community to Bitcoin. That went really well. There's so many parallels. And I think what people misunderstand about Bitcoin a lot of times is that they think it's bad for the environment, or that it's about money and money's bad, or any of these preconceived notions. I had the same ones until I started learning about this stuff. And so I know how that goes. However, Bitcoin is for the people. It's money for the people. It is good for the environment. It's good for the human race. It's good for the individual. It's a very empowering technology. It dissolves powers from hierarchies such as the government or from banks. And our current monetary system is broken from the lens of the individual. It's designed to enrich the wealthy at the expense of the little guy. And so Bitcoin is a revolution. It is revolutionary technology with revolutionary people behind it. The smartest people on the planet are flocking into this space because they see the potential. And I say all this simply because I'm passionate about it, number one, and I'm passionate about the potential it will bring. And I do think that the mycological community and the psychedelic community have a role to play here. And you're all Bitcoiners, you just don't know it yet. So come say hello, come hang out, and yeah, let's do this thing.
Dude, thank you so much for wrapping it up that way. Thanks for coming on. We'll do this again. I'll link up all those links that you mentioned. And thanks again, Brandon. I'll let you go for now.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Have a good one.
Take care.